The desert wind carried the sound of engines long before dawn, and by the time the sun rose over the cracked plains outside Nuevo Laredo, two men had already crossed a line they could never return from. March 9th, 1976. Locals would later say it was the day the wind itself turned silent, as if the earth knew something unspeakable had happened. Luis Moreno was 32, a mechanic from San Antonio with a tired face and the kind of eyes that never lied. He had spent 10 years repairing Border Patrol trucks, hands always blackened by oil, always listening to the same slow AM jazz. His friend, Raymond Cortez, was the opposite, slick, restless, a gambler who could make money appear or vanish with a coin toss. They'd met the previous autumn in a roadside bar called El Gallo Rojo, where stories flowed as fast as tequila and dreams were cheaper than gasoline. Both men had debts. Luis owed money to a bank that was about to take his garage. Raymond owed it to men who didn't use paperwork. One night, between laughter and smoke, a trucker mentioned a secret ranch north of the Rio Bravo, El Viento Rojo, owned by a man named Hector Duran, rumored to be the head of a cartel that smuggled everything from morphine to machine parts. According to the story, Duran didn't trust banks and kept millions in cash hidden under the ranch's concrete floors. 3 million, maybe more, the trucker said. No guards, just dogs and ghosts. Luis laughed at the idea until Raymond looked at him with that feverish spark, the same look gamblers get before the last hand. What if it's real, he said. What if it's sitting there, waiting for someone with the guts to take it? Luis didn't answer then, but that question stayed like sand under his skin. For weeks he dreamed of engines roaring through the night, of desert wind tearing at paper bills. In February 1976, they began planning. Raymond's cousin worked in El Paso and could get them uniforms, fake IDs, even an old sheriff's badge. Luis knew wiring and locks better than most men knew their wives. They watched the ranch from a distance, memorized the guards' routines, and marked a weak fence line near a dry creek bed. March 8th, the night before the heist, they camped a few miles from the property, sitting by a dying fire. The air smelled of diesel and dust. A tape found years later in Luis's truck would capture their voices. If we pull this off, Raymond said, you'll never have to fix another man's truck again. Luis's voice was quieter. And if we don't? A pause, then Raymond's soft laugh. Then the desert will keep our names. Before dawn, they drove an old green pickup through the mist. The headlights were off. Luis carried a toolbox. Raymond, a sawed-off shotgun wrapped in cloth. At 5:17 a.m., they cut through the fence, silenced the dogs with meat laced in chloroform, and reached the storage building, a squat concrete bunker with a steel door. Inside, 3 guards were playing cards. What happened next lasted less than a minute. 3 shots, 1 scream, silence. When the sun rose, the ranch was empty. Tire tracks led north toward the border. On the dirt floor, near the open safe, lay a melted padlock, a burned ledger, and a single coin stamped with Duran's initials. The safe itself was empty, except for torn wrappings that had once held stacks of $100 bills. By noon, word reached Laredo. Duran's vault had been hit. The cartel moved fast. They sealed the ranch, burned the bodies, erased everything. The official police report, filed by Sheriff David Mendez, described it only as an act of unknown violence resulting in fatalities. But everyone knew the truth. Someone had stolen from the devil himself. Luis and Raymond disappeared. Some said they crossed into New Mexico under false names. Others swore they boarded a freighter in Corpus Christi bound for Havana. But 2 weeks later, a mechanic in El Paso reported a man matching Luis's description buying parts for a pickup, paying in cash, handshaking. The bill of sale was dated March 22nd. It was the last confirmed sighting. April 1976. Hector Duran offered a bounty of $250,000 for the thieves, dead or alive. Rumors spread of roadblocks, desert searches, unmarked cars. People whispered that Duran's own men were killing each other, trying to claim the reward. In June, an abandoned house outside Santa Rosa caught fire. Inside, investigators found 3 charred bodies, one of them wearing a mechanic's jacket. Near the remains lay a half-burned photo, two men standing beside a truck, smiling. Written on the back, "We made it." Sheriff Mendez sent the photo to state authorities, but the file vanished. Whether by fear or corruption, no one looked further. Duran's influence reached deep, and the border towns learned again the price of silence. Archive note, state record, July 1976, subject, unidentified male, approximate 30 to 35, cause of death gunshot wound. Found near I-40. Possible link to Laredo robbery. Case closed due to jurisdictional limits. That same month, two men were seen drinking in a small bar outside Roswell. The bartender, interviewed years later, remembered one of them wearing a gold watch and speaking nervously about a job gone wrong. When shown old photos, he pointed to Raymond Cortez. "Yeah, that was him," he said. But the other one, he looked scared, kept saying he wanted out. By late 76, Duran's men had gone quiet. No one knew if the money had been recovered or buried. One evening in November, a rancher found a metal drum half buried in the sand 20 miles from a border. Inside were ash, burned papers, and two revolvers. One was engraved RC, the other LM. Ballistics matched the bullets found in the Santa Rosa bodies. The sheriff's office stored the weapons under seal, but the evidence disappeared within weeks. The official version claimed the robbers died in a shootout with Duran's men, their bodies cremated and scattered. Yet no proof existed. For years afterward, whispers persisted of two strangers seen drifting through small towns, one limping, one coughing blood, both carrying too much silence. In December 1976, radio chatter intercepted near Del Rio mentioned a deal between cartel envoys and a border official named Price. Code words: the wind, the vault, return. Agents suspected an exchange, possibly the stolen money being laundered back through law enforcement. But the transmission ended abruptly with a gunshot sound, and no report followed. Then, in March 1977, almost exactly 1 year after the heist, a letter arrived at the Laredo Sheriff's Office. Typed and signed, smeared with oil. Archive. Letter received March 8th, 1977. He took the money and left me here. Said he'd come back for me in San Diego. He never did. The dogs still howl at night. If anyone finds this, tell them I tried to do the right thing. The typewriter used matched an old Olympia model registered to a motel owner in Deming, New Mexico. When deputies visited, the owner said a man named Luis had rented a room for 2 nights, paid cash, then vanished. On the bed, they found a Bible, a broken radio, and a crumpled photo of a beach labeled San Diego, someday. The sheriff sealed the evidence, but Duran's men found out. The motel burned down 3 days later. The file survived only because Mendez hid a copy in his desk. Transcript, local radio, April 1977. Caller, they say one of them's still alive. Host, which one? Caller, the gambler. He's been seen near Amarillo. Drives a white Ford. Looks over his shoulder every 10 seconds. That summer, a highway patrolman stopped a man for speeding near Amarillo. The driver produced a license under the name Edward Lane. When asked where he was headed, he replied, "West. Always west." The patrolman let him go. Weeks later, he recognized the face in a wanted bulletin, Raymond Cortez. But by then, the trail was gone. His car was found abandoned near a drainage canal. Inside were bloodstains, a pack of cigarettes, and a cassette labeled March 9th. The tape contained only 30 seconds of sound, footsteps, heavy breathing, and a single sentence, "He's coming." The investigation never recovered from that silence. Duran himself disappeared in late 1978, reportedly fleeing to Colombia, though some said he died on his private airstrip after his own men turned on him. Without his shadow, the story dissolved. Still, the desert never forgot. Every spring, around the anniversary, travelers claimed to see headlights on the old Viento Road, flickering in the distance, then vanishing. Some said the wind carried a whisper, 2 voices arguing, one begging forgiveness. The official record lists the case as unsolved armed robbery, presumed fatalities. But in the last line of Sheriff Mendez's private notes, dated December 1977, He wrote, "They say the money's still out there. Maybe it is, but I think the desert already spent it." And with that, the first chapter of the Lost Cartel heist closed, not with justice, but with wind and silence. If you want to know what was found when the search resumed in 1978, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. By the start of 1978, the heat over the border towns felt heavier than usual, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Hector Duran's empire had begun to crumble. His top lieutenants turned on one another, shipments vanished, and whispers spread that the old man was losing his grip. Amid the chaos, the story of the missing 3 million returned like a ghost. Someone claimed to have seen one of the thieves alive in Tucson, wearing a torn leather jacket and limping badly. Others said both men had been buried long ago under the ruins of El Viento Rojo. But in February, a new clue surfaced, one that changed everything. A gas station attendant near Sierra Blanca found an old metal box lodged behind the waste bin. Inside were damp bills totaling $18,000, a worn photograph of 2 men beside a truck, and a torn receipt dated March 1976 for fuel purchased at a ranch road 40 miles north of Laredo. The handwriting on the receipt was unmistakable: R. Cortez. Sheriff Mendez was called in again, though his superiors warned him not to dig too deep. "Let sleeping dogs lie," one official told him. But Mendez couldn't. He had lived with the story for 2 years and felt it gnawing at him like a fever. He drove to Sierra Blanca himself, the same dirt roads echoing with dust and memory. He knew then that at least one of them had survived past the fire. Back in Laredo, Duran was desperate. His enemies were closing in, and he needed leverage. Sources inside his circle later revealed that he had been searching not just for the money, but for a ledger, an accounting book stolen with it that listed dozens of corrupt officials on both sides of the border. That ledger, he believed, was worth more than the cash. If Luis or Raymond had it, they weren't just thieves, they were dead men waiting. In May 1978, reports surfaced of an unidentified body pulled from the Rio Bravo near Zapata County. The man had been shot once in the chest, his face mutilated, but his hands were intact. On the right hand, one finger bore a tattoo, the letter R. The sheriff's office buried him as a John Doe, but the rumors began immediately. The gambler was dead. Yet one detail in the coroner's file told another story. The body had been in the water less than a day. Whoever killed him had done it nearby, recently, and whoever that was, they hadn't found the money. Luis Moreno, meanwhile, seemed to have vanished entirely. But in August 1978, a used car dealer in Albuquerque filed a complaint about a man who had sold him a 1974 Ford pickup with false papers. The seller called himself Carlos Vega. The registration number matched the stolen truck from El Paso, linked to the heist. The man disappeared before police could question him. In the glove box, the dealer later found a folded napkin with a scrawled note. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Meet me at the radio tower, September 9th. No one came to that tower. That fall, Duran's power imploded. He boarded a twin-engine plane bound for Medellin and never arrived. Some said the plane exploded midair, others that he faked his death. Either way, by 1979, the cartel fractured into smaller factions, each hungry for control and vengeance. Without Duran, the border became lawless again. Gunfire returned to the nights. Men vanished, and new names replaced the old ones. The heist faded into myth until January 1979, when Sheriff Mendez received an envelope without a return address. Inside was a strip of film negatives, 2 frames still visible. One showed a man kneeling in the sand beside an open drum. The other showed 2 shadowed figures standing over him. Written in faint pencil, "You forgot something." The handwriting, Mendez later confirmed, matched Luis Moreno's known signature. The photo was dated 1977, a year after the letter that said he'd been left behind. That meant Luis had survived at least a year longer, and someone had taken that photo to prove it. Mendez tried to track the origin of the envelope. It had been postmarked from Amarillo. He drove there quietly, pretending it was a vacation. The town smelled of gasoline and fried food. motels blinking red signs through the night. He visited every photo studio he could find, showing the negative. Finally, one old technician recognized the paper stock. It was only sold at a single shop in 1977, near a diner off Route 66. The shop had closed, but the owner remembered something. Two men came in, one coughing blood, he said. They asked for development in a hurry. Paid double. Left before sunrise. When shown pictures, he hesitated, then pointed at Raymond's face. That's the sick one, he said. But the other man, he was quieter, looked like he'd already buried something. Mendez returned to Texas and filed a confidential report. He never told his superiors. But that spring, something strange happened. The Laredo police chief was found dead in his car from a supposed heart attack. The same week, Mendez's office was broken into, his drawer emptied. Only one folder was missing, the one labeled Viento Rojo case. The message was clear: stop digging. But fate didn't care about warnings. In July 1979, a sandstorm exposed part of a buried object near the abandoned ranch. Children playing nearby found a rusted lockbox half buried in dust. Inside were two revolvers, one marked LM, one RC, and a stack of photographs, sun-bleached but recognizable. One showed Duran himself shaking hands with a man in a sheriff's badge. On the back of another photo, written hastily, were 4 words: "We were never alone." When Mendez saw that, he understood. The robbery hadn't just been two desperate men stealing from a cartel. It had been an inside job. Someone within law enforcement had used Luis and Raymond as pawns, sending them into the ranch to retrieve something far more valuable than money: evidence, names, perhaps the ledger itself. And when they succeeded, the same people who sent them made sure they never lived to talk about it. That realization haunted Mendez for the rest of his life. He started keeping his notes hidden at home, writing only in shorthand. In one entry dated October 1979, he wrote, "RC not dead. Seen in Nogales. Missing part of ear. Using name Henry Vale. Looks like he's waiting for someone." The same month, a murder occurred in Nogales. A motel clerk was shot behind the desk. On the counter lay a torn $20 bill and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. A witness claimed the shooter fled in a white Ford. The description matched Raymond. The witness also said the man shouted before leaving, "You left him to die." After that, the trail turned quiet again. By 1980, the heist had become a legend retold in bars and truck stops. People claimed the money was buried under the old Viento Tower or hidden in barrels of tar crossing the border. Every few months, someone would dig holes in the sand, chasing ghosts. But none found a single dollar. Then came the letter. March 1981. Exactly 5 years after the heist. Sheriff Mendez received it in the morning mail. Typed uneven, the ink smudged by sweat. Archive letter, March 9th, 1981. "You were right, Sheriff. It was never about money. It was about names. He made us dig our own graves and told me to leave him there. I still hear him. I don't know how much time I have left. I'm going back to the ranch to finish it. If you find this, don't come after me." The wind hums louder now. Mendez drove out that same night, against every order. The moon was pale, the air dry as paper. The road to El Viento Rojo was nearly gone, swallowed by time. He parked near the ruins and walked with a lantern. The air smelled of iron and rot. In the distance, he saw movement, a flicker of light inside what had once been the storage bunker. He called out, but only the wind answered. Inside, the floor had caved in. There were traces of footprints, cigarette butts, and the remains of a small fire. At the center of the room lay a pile of burned paper. Mendez sifted through the ash and found pieces of a photograph melted together. One image still visible, a man's hand holding a revolver, pointing toward the camera. Another piece of paper, half burned, bore a single typed line. "I buried him where the sand hums." He looked around, listening. And for the first time, he heard it, a faint, low resonance coming from the dunes outside. Not quite wind, not quite machinery, just a trembling vibration under the ground. He followed the sound to a small depression near the creek bed. There, half buried in sand, was a metal drum sealed with tar. He tried to open it, but the lid was welded shut. Exhausted, he marked the spot with a stick and left to return with tools. But when he came back 2 days later, the drum was gone. Only tire tracks remained, leading toward the highway. No one ever saw Raymond Cortez again. A week later, a truck exploded near Eagle Pass. Inside were two bodies burned beyond recognition. One carried a badge belonging to a deputy named Price, the same official rumored to have worked for Duran. The other was never identified. In the wreckage, investigators found the melted remains of film reels and a single gold watch engraved RC. The watch had stopped at 11:42 p.m. That explosion closed the file for good. The federal authorities took over, citing national security interests. Sheriff Mendez retired soon after. In his final report, he wrote, "We dug in the wrong places. The treasure wasn't money. It was the truth, and it was buried long before we arrived." By late 1981, all that remained of El Viento Rojo was scorched earth and silence. Travelers still passed the old road sometimes, seeing nothing but wind and mirage. Locals avoided it, saying the air there buzzed, that the sand whispered names when the moon was full. One autumn evening, a rancher found a Bible half buried near the creek. Inside, pressed between pages, was a torn photo of two men smiling beside a pickup. On the back, "We made it. March 9th, 1976. Next to the photo lay a rusted keychain engraved LC. The rancher turned it over to authorities, but the evidence was misplaced before it reached the Capitol. The file was stamped closed. And so the story ended where it began, in the desert wind that hummed over unmarked graves and scattered money. Some say a fortune still lies beneath the dunes, untouched, waiting for anyone foolish enough to listen to the wind. Others believe it was never buried at all, that the money rode away in that last truck with the badge and the watch and the ghosts of two men who dreamed too big. Sheriff Mendez died in 1983. In his belongings, his daughter later found a final note written in fading ink. They weren't villains, just men who wanted out. When the wind hums at night, it's not ghosts. It's them, still arguing over who got to drive.